Two fully loaded Boeing 747s are about to collide on a fog-bound runway, and nobody in either cockpit realizes it yet. In one aircraft, the captain is pulling back on the yoke, trying to claw into the air early, tail dragging on concrete, engines screaming. In the other, the crew has just spotted headlights emerging from the fog ahead and is desperately trying to turn off the runway onto grass while traveling barely fast enough to steer. Neither crew is panicking. Neither made a single catastrophic error. Nobody was drunk. No critical system failed. The weather is bad but not impossible. And yet in approximately 8 seconds, 583 people will be dead in what remains the worst accident in aviation history. Not because of what went wrong, but because of what felt right. Not because anyone ignored the rules, but because the rules themselves contained invisible gaps that nobody realized were lethal until bodies started burning on a remote island runway. This is the Tenerife airport disaster, and it didn't happen because someone screwed up. It happened because a dozen tiny, reasonable decisions quietly stacked into something unspeakable. March 27th, 1977 begins as a completely unremarkable day in commercial aviation. Pan Am Flight 1, 736, a chartered Boeing 747 packed with American cruise passengers, departs JFK bound for Las Palmas in the Canary Islands. The flight is running about 45 minutes late. Nothing unusual, just the normal friction of moving hundreds of people through an airport. Most passengers are older couples who saved for years for this Mediterranean cruise. They're cheerful, they're excited, they have no idea their delay, just put them on a collision course with history. The crew is as experienced as they come. Captain Victor Grubbs is 56, a senior Pan Am captain with decades of international flying. First Officer Robert Bragg is 38. Flight engineer George Warnes is 46. Between them, they've logged tens of thousands of hours. They've flown through wars, storms, mechanical emergencies, and every imaginable abnormality. Today is supposed to be easy. At the same time, thousands of miles north, KLM Flight 4805 pushes back from Amsterdam Schiphol Airport at exactly 9 in the morning. It's another charter, another 747, another group of vacationers heading to the exact same destination. And in command is Captain Jacob Veldhuizen van Zanten, KLM's absolute top-tier 747 instructor. Van Zanten doesn't just fly the aircraft, he trains the people who train other captains. His face appears in KLM advertisements. Within Dutch aviation, he is royalty. First Officer Klaas Meurs has over 9,000 hours, but is relatively new to the 747. Flight engineer Willem Schroeder is experienced and notably direct, the kind of crew member willing to speak up when something feels off. It's a strong crew, professional, confident, competent. Everything looks textbook normal. But while both flights cruise toward the Canary Islands, something else is happening on the ground. At Las Palmas Airport, two men walk calmly into the terminal, leave a bag near a flower shop, and walk out. Inside that bag is a bomb. Shortly before 1 in the afternoon, airport authorities receive a phone call from someone claiming to represent a separatist group demanding Canary Islands independence. He says bombs have been planted and demands evacuation. 15 minutes later, the bomb detonates. The terminal roof is damaged. Several people are injured. Authorities immediately assume more devices might be hidden. Las Palmas Airport is shut down completely. Every inbound flight is diverted. No exceptions. KLM 4805 is circling overhead when the order comes. Pan Am 1736 is minutes behind. Both are told the same thing. You cannot land here, you cannot hold, divert immediately to Los Rodeos Airport on the neighboring island of Tenerife. Los Rodeos, even in 1977, it had a reputation. The airport sits nearly 2,000 feet above sea level on Tenerife's northern side, directly beneath Mount Teide, a massive volcano that dominates the island's weather. Moist Atlantic air gets forced upward by the mountain, cools rapidly, and condenses into dense, fast-moving fog. Visibility at Los Rodeos doesn't deteriorate gradually, it collapses. One moment you can see across the field. Next, you can barely see your wingtip. Between the mid and late 1960s, multiple fatal crashes occurred in or near this airport. It's so problematic that a new airport was already built on Tenerife's southern coast where weather is stable. But in 1977, that airport still isn't open due to political delays. So everyone uses Los Rodeos. And one thing Los Rodeos didn't have was ground radar. KLM lands first at 1:38 p.m. and taxis as far forward on the apron as possible. Pan Am lands 37 minutes later at 2:15 p.m. and parks behind. Within an hour, the apron is jammed. Aircraft diverted from Las Palmas are stacked everywhere. The airport was never designed for this volume. KLM initially keeps passengers on board expecting a quick turnaround, but after 20 minutes, they let them disembark into the already packed terminal. Pan Am's passengers aren't allowed inside. There's simply no room. Instead, they stay aboard, with mobile stairs rolled up so they can at least step outside for air. Captain Grubbs tries to keep spirits up. He invites passengers into the cockpit, explains the systems, and shows them the view. For many, it becomes a trip highlight. They'll remember it fondly for the rest of their very short lives. Meanwhile, in the KLM cockpit, tension is building. The crew is discussing recently changed Dutch aviation regulations. Flight time limits used to be guidelines with minor penalties for violations. Now they're criminal law. Exceeding duty limits can result in fines or even jail time. If they're delayed much longer, they'll be forced to stay overnight in Las Palmas, making a same-day return to Amsterdam legally impossible. Captain Van Zanten mentions he's worried about his wife and children hearing news of the bombing and fearing he's in danger. He's under pressure, both personal and professional. Then he makes a decision that seems perfectly logical. If they're going to sit here anyway, they might as well refuel for the entire return leg to Amsterdam. Operationally, it's smart. It minimizes turnaround time later. But refueling a 747 is a massive operation. It takes 20 to 30 minutes. Once you start, you don't stop halfway. And the aircraft becomes significantly heavier, requiring higher takeoff speed and a longer runway roll. Only minutes after KLM starts refueling, Las Palmas reopens. Pan Am immediately requests engine start, hoping to leave. They're denied. The KLM jet is blocking them. There isn't enough clearance to taxi past. Pan Am must wait. Captain Grubbs radios KLM directly, asking how long. The answer? 20 to 30 minutes. Frustrated, Pan Am's first officer and flight engineer actually go outside and measure whether they can squeeze by anyway. They come up short by less than 20 feet. Not enough. They're stuck. And one KLM passenger, Robina van Lanschot, doesn't reboard. She works for the tour company and has a boyfriend in Tenerife. She gets permission to stay, not knowing she will be one of the only people of both aircraft who survives the day. At 4:45 p.m., KLM finishes refueling. Engines start. The aircraft taxis toward runway 12. By now, fog is forming. Visibility is fluctuating wildly as clouds roll across the field. Sometimes it drops below 500 meters. Air traffic control clears KLM to taxi onto the runway, backtrack, and exit at the third taxiway. The readback is wrong, the controller corrects it. KLM is now told to backtrack the entire runway, turn around at the far end, and hold. Pan Am gets the same instructions and enters the runway behind KLM. Neither crew has ever operated at Los Rodeos before. Taxiway signs are poor. The third exit requires an extremely sharp turn that's nearly impossible for a 747. The fourth exit makes far more sense geometrically. Inside both cockpits, crews are debating which taxiway the controller actually means. Radio communication starts getting hesitant. Call signs are misstated. There are pauses while the controller considers phrasing. At 5:03 p.m., Pan Am explicitly confirms taxi off on the third exit. The controller replies clearly, affirmative, third exit, 1, 2, 3. The KLM crew hears this. Pan Am continues taxiing. Moments later, the controller calls Pan Am again. Report when leaving the runway. Pan Am acknowledges. To anyone listening, especially a crew convinced the runway ahead is clear, this sounds like confirmation the other aircraft has already exited. It is not. KLM reaches the end, completes a 180-degree turn, and lines up for departure. Captain Van Zanten briefly advances the throttles. First Officer Mers stops him. "We don't have clearance." Van Zanten pulls power back. "I know, ask." Mers radios that they're ready for takeoff and awaiting clearance. The controller issues a route clearance, including post-departure navigation instructions. The phrase "after takeoff" appears in the transmission, but it's procedural language describing what to do once airborne, not permission to begin the takeoff roll. Van Zanten interprets it as clearance. He pushes the throttles forward. Mers reads back the clearance, and his transmission includes words that sound like, "We are now at takeoff." The controller responds, "Okay, stand by for takeoff." But at that exact instant, Pan Am transmits, "We are still taxiing down the runway." The two transmissions overlap. Radio interference causes a harsh squeal. In the KLM cockpit, only one word comes through clearly. Okay. The engines spool up. The aircraft accelerates. Inside the Pan Am cockpit, everything is calm until Captain Grubbs sees lights through the fog. At first, he assumes they're stationary, maybe another aircraft parked on a taxiway. Then he realizes they're moving toward him, fast. "Oh my God," he says quietly. Then louder, "Get off, get off, get off." Full left rudder, full power. The Pan Am jet barely reaches 20 knots as it tries desperately to turn off the runway onto grass. In the KLM cockpit, the flight engineer sees something. "Is he not clear?" he asks. Nobody answers. V1 is called rotation speed. Van Zanten pulls back hard on the yoke, trying to get airborne early. The tail scrapes concrete, throwing sparks. The nose lifts. The main gear leaves the ground briefly. For one impossible moment, it looks like they might clear. They don't.
The KLM 4805 is now ready for takeoff, and we're waiting for our ATC clearance.
KLM 8705, you're clear to the Papa Beacon, climb to and maintain flight level 9 Right, and after takeoff, proceed with heading 040 until intersecting the 325 radial from Las Palmas Vivar.
Roger, sure, we're clear to the Papa Beacon. Flight level 90, right, turn out 040, and then intercepting the 325, and we now take off.
Okay.
Flight the triple 1736.
Papa Alpha 1736, report runway clear.
Okay, we'll report when we're clear.
Thank you.
The KLM's right landing gear and engine tear directly through the upper fuselage of the Pan Am jet like a saw through aluminum. The cockpit survives, the midsection disintegrates. KLM continues airborne for another 500 feet before slamming back onto the runway in a massive fireball. All 248 people aboard die instantly. The Pan Am aircraft breaks apart, fire spreads immediately, but the forward and rear sections remain partially intact. 61 people escape through torn fuselage sections and over wings, jumping nearly 20 feet to the ground below. The controller sees nothing. There's no radar. The fog is total. He only knows something catastrophic has happened when flames become visible through the clouds. Rescue crews arrive slowly, guided only by heat and screaming. By the time they reach the wreckage, 583 people are dead. It is the deadliest accident in aviation history, a record that still stands today. And it happened not in a storm, not from mechanical failure, not from terrorism. It happened because communication broke down in ways nobody had anticipated. Because pressure influenced judgment. Because okay sounded like a clearance. Because we are now at takeoff sounded like a position report instead of an action statement. Because nobody could see. Because procedural language contained ambiguity. Because experienced professionals made assumptions that seemed entirely reasonable at the time. The investigation will place primary blame on Captain Van Zanten for initiating takeoff without explicit clearance, but the legacy extends far beyond individual culpability. This disaster forced global aviation to confront uncomfortable truths. Standard phraseology was rewritten worldwide. The word takeoff is now forbidden in any radio transmission unless actual takeoff clearance is being issued. Crew resource management became mandatory, training junior officers to challenge captains when something feels wrong. Ground radar became essential at all commercial airports. Cockpit voice recorders were analyzed not just for what was said, but for tone, hesitation, and unspoken hierarchy. The entire culture of aviation began shifting from a model that valued authority and decisiveness above all else, toward one that valued communication, verification, and the courage to say wait. Tenerife didn't reshape aviation because of what happened. Crashes, even terrible ones, had happened before. It reshaped aviation because of why it happened. Because it revealed that competence, experience, and good intentions are not enough. Because it demonstrated that systems designed by intelligent people can still contain invisible flaws that only become obvious when bodies are burning. Because it proved that assumptions kill. That fatigue and pressure warp judgment. That ambiguity in language is not a minor irritation, but a genuine threat. That hierarchy in the cockpit can silence the one voice that might prevent disaster. And that sometimes the most dangerous thing in aviation is not ignorance or recklessness, it's confidence. 583 people died on a fog-covered runway because a dozen small, reasonable decisions aligned in exactly the wrong way. And the people making those decisions never saw it coming until headlights emerged from the clouds. That's what makes Tenerife so disturbing. Not the explosion, not the fire, the normalcy. Right up until the very end, everything felt routine.